there, this is Lenny, the Litmos mascot, and I'm here to welcome you to Litmos. We develop learning solutions for the world's best performing companies. The Solution Suite is a powerful but easy to use LMS, comprehensive course libraries, integration into top workflow tools, and services to support your success. Everything you need to power your corporate learning programs. And you'll be in good company. Thousands of organizations trust Litmos solutions to centralize and deliver training to employees, customers, and partners. These organizations understand that learning is a transformative force that fuels individual, team, and organization success. Simply put, a super intuitive interface and an innovative feature set loved by admins and learners alike. Add to that instant access to an ever-growing library of training courses, robust content authoring, as well as easy migration of your proprietary content, and you'll see why Litmos stands out from the pack. But let's get specific. With Litmos training, you can quickly deploy and integrate with the rest of your learning ecosystem without getting bogged down by countless hours of complexity. From there, you can customize your instance to match your company's brand down to the finest details, from fonts and colors to headers and footers. And more, you'll benefit from the convenience and cost savings of built-in content author. No need for additional third-party tools. Simply create your own courses right within Litmos, leverage our robust content libraries, or import your own content directly into the system. Litmos helps you automate training assignment and learning paths. From there, they're good to go with 24/7 access to learning, whether sitting at their desk or on the move from any leading mobile device. The feature list goes on and on, from gamification and multi-language support to video assessments and built-in reporting. And we have the services to support your success. To see everything in action, check out a live demo or a free trial experience of what Litmos can do for you.
Hello and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, how to make captivating content, sponsored by Litmos and We Learn. I see some comments about hearing audio, can't hear audio. I think it's 50-50. Definitely let me know if you can hear everything, if everything's all good. Otherwise, let's get this show on the road. I am Liz Spate, the Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat window to interact with our speaker with any comments. And as for those questions, please submit all those questions to the Q&A section on your toolbar below. It really helps us address all those questions throughout the event and during the end of our Q&A section. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media. So please follow Training Industry Inc. as you share your favorite takeaways with your colleagues. At the end of your time with us today, you will receive a short survey that will pop open in your browser. We appreciate your thoughts on today's event, and all of our sessions will be recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us today with the link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we would love to welcome you. Training Industry honestly exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazines, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. Make Training Industry your go-to resource for learning solutions. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers. Jonathan Hill is an award-winning learning manager with over 10 years of experience designing and delivering training for the financials, gaming, and corporate learning sectors. He has led international teams of designers to deliver a digital learning strategies of large multinational organizations. And in September of 2023, he joined Litmos as the Director of Learning and Training Content. Now, Shannon Herrera, sorry, apologies. My screen got taken over. My bad. Let me give her the proper introduction. She is the head of content consultation curator for Go1, and in this role, she leads a team of learning consultants who are focused on helping customers meet their business goals utilizing the Go1 content library. She has been involved in training and development for over 20 years and earned her master's degree in instructional design from Peru University. She previously served on the executive board of Utah ATD and on the board of directors at the Grand Theater in Salt Lake City. So without further ado, let's kick it over to our speakers.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining, and thanks to the team at Training Industry for having us today. Shannon and I are really looking forward to sharing with you some of our tips for mastering the art of storytelling in L&D. And it's a big area. It's not something we can hope to cover comprehensively in the time that we have, but hopefully this will be the first page, the first chapter on your journey into this.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. We're super excited to chat about this. This is one of my favorite topics. So today we're going to really dig into storytelling and how you can use storytelling as part of your instructional design strategy, how to build a story, and when to bring in content from other places. And then we're going to give you some inspiration. So let's get started.
So first of all, we're just going to have run a quick poll and ask you all this question. What's the biggest challenge you faced when using storytelling to create engaging learning experiences in L&D? And there are 4 options here, so take your pick. So do you have trouble finding the right narrative that resonates with learners? Are your resources limited? And do you have limited tools for creating stories? Do you have trouble integrating storytelling with learning objectives, for instance? Or is it more about keeping learners engaged throughout the story? Which is the biggest challenge for you? Let's take a look at what everyone thinks.
Beautiful. I'll give everybody 5 more seconds. And here are the results.
Okay. Any surprises there for you, Shannon? Is that consistent with what you thought might come out of that?
Yeah, I think that that's pretty consistent from what I've experienced in when like really creating engaging learning experiences with storytelling. Like that, it is trying to find that right narrative, make something that that people can feel seen in, and feel like there's like they know what those experiences are like. But yeah, no, this doesn't surprise me at all. How about you, Jonathan?
No, I'm a little surprised at how even the split is, but that's good. So I think everybody will get something from today's session, but we'll definitely give you some pointers, some actionable advice for each of these issues. Yes. Okay, so chapter 1, what is instructional story design? So we're going to look at a few key points to this, and I think it makes sense to go back to what a story is and how a story is composed, and the kind of structure and theories behind storytelling. And back in 1949, Joseph Campbell published his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he proposed, and it was his proposition, that pretty much every story boils down to a hero's journey, which is commonly found across all cultures, this kind of idea of a monomyth. This is why you sometimes hear the story of Superman likened to sort of Hebrew stories as well, story of Moses. It's kind of all these sort of stories are just being retold in different ways. The story of King Arthur, and they get reused and recycled and reinterpreted in each generation. So his 12 to 17 stage journey is quite a big model. It's quite a big, complex model. It's a little bit dated in places. Particularly, there's a step called temptation by women, which is is something we've moved away from here in storytelling. But the idea that it's this hero going through a journey which is transformative, and they come out of this process changed. And it boils down, it can be boiled down to about 20 common plots. And they can include things like escape, revenge, rescue, pursuit, metamorphosis, romance. And even before I started really looking at instructional design through the lens of storytelling, I'd often go to this book. Actually, you can't really see it on there, 20 Master Plots and How to Build Them by Ronald B. Tobias. This is a very old copy. I do believe it's still in print. But that takes this kind of hero's journey and analyzes it in terms of plot types. So that's a really good way into how stories are constructed, and answering that first poll, how do you find a story that resonates with the content, resonates with the learning outcomes? But an even simpler way of looking at this, and one which I encourage you all to look into, is Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favorite authors. He modeled the shapes of stories as graphs. And one of my favorites is his very simple interpretation of this hero's journey, which is called Man in Hole. And it's essentially, there's a man in a hole, he needs to get out of the hole. And that's the story. So what Kurt Vonnegut used to do was he'd draw graphs of stories. So I'll just hold this up and see if you can see this with the, that's not going to work, is it? There we go. So you can see there's a graph of a story, and you start the story in a certain position. You've got good fortune, and then you get in a hole and you have to get out of the hole. And it's a very, very simple model. It's a 3-step model. It's about somebody finding themselves in trouble, then getting out of trouble and being better off for the experience. And that's ultimately what we need to do with training. That's exactly what a lot of compliance training is seeking to do. It's showing people when you're in the hole, how do you get out of the hole? But we commonly do that in a very kind of third-person documentary sort of way. And so there's lots to be gained from sort of turning the storytelling lens into a first-person situation there, getting in the hole with the protagonist and trying to help them out of the hole. So we can use this model to present a wide array of content from either a third or first person perspective. But like any film director, we need to make choices where we point that camera. So just bear that in mind. Is that something we're going to talk about today? Is those perspectives and choices of perspective can really influence how the story goes. If we just pop to the next slide. So I'm really keen on a technique called the cold open. And you see here that Lenny's dressed like James Bond, because that's what a cold open is. Commonly, a James Bond film will open with James dropped into a situation. You've got no idea how he got there, but you kind of see how he gets out of it. And commonly, then you kind of find out how he got there in the process. So that cold open is an example of a kind of technique in screenwriting called start late, leave early. So you drop people into the problem, the man's in the hole, and you leave a little bit early before, you never see James Bond sweeping up the broken glass and helping tidy up the mess afterwards. That's not the important bit of the story. So it's getting out early enough so the important details of the plot are there. We're going to focus with a lot of examples today on first person narrative, because as I say, taking that third person narrative gives you a more documentary feel, and first person narrative, putting yourself alongside and even in the shoes of the protagonist as a learner, can have really kind of powerful storytelling applications. And then conversely, looking at how you can use casts of characters to support the journey, and what those characters need to do and how they act, and how you can take advantage of what's called the Rashomon effect sometimes as well, because different characters might have a different perspective on different situations, which is a really cool way of looking at sort of soft skills, and also where people may not have the same view on things and how things can be interpreted differently in the workplace. So my team and I at Litmos, the instructional design team, have been studying a book recently by Rance Green called Instructional Story Design. And this kind of crystallizes a lot of the things we're going to talk to you about today. And it's a book I'd strongly recommend. If you're in any way used to kind of action mapping and approaches like Kathy Moore's Map It, then it will feel very familiar. But what Rance has done is he's kind of been able to distill this into storytelling terms, so you can get like actionable training out of a story and vice versa. So the key benefits of going down this approach are that it makes content more memorable. You may have seen, these people who have really good memories, who can memorize a deck of cards, or 52 cards randomized in order. Often they do that by giving the cards characters or names and putting them in a story and putting them in a sequence. So content and sequencing and chronology makes content more memorable. It prepares learners for action. It's like a flight simulator. You're kind of creating a scenario, creating a situation that they can sort of imagine and see themselves in. It engages emotions, undoubtedly, because in doing that, then you're going to kind of have empathy for the protagonist, for the characters. And it provides valuable context as well. So it's giving relevant context for how those knowledge and skills you're going to talk about apply in real life situations. It increases motivation. A well-designed story can motivate learners to want to take action, because that's another key thing here. We give people the tools to do things, but we need to give them the kind of impetus to do something with that. And it can improve knowledge transfer. It definitely helps bridge the gap between theory and practical application. So there's some really interesting interfaces between the two there in storytelling. And it enhances problem-solving skills. It allows learners to think critically and solve realistic problems as well when it's done well. And that empathy, it's a kind of parallel to engaging emotions. It's about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, seeing a situation from somebody else's point of view, that kind of Rashomon effect. And it provides a unified narrative, so it can tie together different learning components. So this also tips into the curation question as well, about using stories to have a creative, cohesive experience. And it can increase retention. So information embedded in stories tends to be retained longer than facts alone. So think about all those nursery rhymes, those stories from your childhood that you remember and why you remember them. It's it plays to something that we have in us, that we engage with stories in a way that can be really useful and leveraged in learning situations. So we can all name a book, a TV show, a movie that you got to the end and it had a disappointing ending. Yeah, you were kind of like, oh, you know, that wasn't what I was expecting, or it's what I hoped for, or it didn't make sense. And that's usually because there's kind of three issues with the storytelling. It's the shape of the story is wrong. The hero recovers too easily or doesn't recover at all, or sometimes because there's no stakes or realistic consequences. And often it's because the ending makes no sense or contradicts what came before it. So what I'm going to look at in this section is how to kind of try and avoid some of those by applying some structure to your storytelling templates. So again, as instructional designers, we should be starting at the end. We should be working back from what the learning outcomes are. And if that seems kind of rudimentary, I apologize, but that's really what we need to be working towards here. I'm smiling as I say this because I'm thinking about the TV show Lost, which I was very invested in for a number of years. And then you got to the end and it was like, that really wasn't a great ending. So I often think if the producers and writers of Lost had started at the end, that would have been a much better experience. And then when you're working backwards, treating the milestones, the learning outcomes that sort of build to your learning outcomes, those milestones as chapters in the book. So have each part of the course relate to a learning outcome, to a learning objective. And then when you're doing that, don't kind of be don't kind of be hung up on what I'd call seductive details. There's a principle in script writing and screenwriting called Chekhov's gun, and it's really good for instructional design as well, and it's really important in storytelling, is that essentially everything that you put on the page, everything you put on the screen or your slide needs to have a resolution. It needs to have some relevance to the plot. So the Chekhov's gun example is if you put a gun on the table, by the last act, that gun must have gone off. There must have been a reason for it being there. So those milestones need to kind of latch to your learning outcomes and be really kind of economical with what you're doing in your storytelling to make sure everything supports that. And then use your cast of characters to bring all of that to life. And don't worry about making your cast of characters completely likable. They don't need to be absolute geniuses or absolute experts in their topics. In fact, there's a lot of good training which shows people doing things poorly or making poor decisions. But they need to be relatable. Your characters need to be relatable and likable from the point of view that you could see yourself in them. You wouldn't necessarily agree with what they've done, but you can see yourself in them, which is a really kind of powerful place to play in. So this formula at the bottom here is borrowed completely from Rant Screen's book. And it's just showing you that mixture of relatable characters and strong conflict causes a desire for resolution. So this storytelling, we have this urge as kind of readers, as listeners, as watchers, to see these threads resolve, these things come to a satisfactory conclusion. So what I'm going to play for you now are two videos. I'm playing at the same time. The top video is introducing you to a character and showing you some of her background. And the bottom video is showing you how you can take action as an interviewer to resolve this conflict here. And this is from an upcoming suite of courses from Litmos on neurodiversity in the workplace.
Hi, I'm Rosalina. I've been looking for a job for months and finally had my first phone call with a job I applied for recently. I'm autistic, and I didn't know this until I turned 22 and got a diagnosis. I've had the odd job here or there, but never one that lasted longer than a year. I just finished my degree, and I'm smart. It's just that I get nervous during interviews, making it difficult to speak about my skills confidently. In-person interviews have never been one of my strong points. However, over the years, I've adapted by masking to be normal during them. I have excellent skills like being creative and being a problem solver, but most of the time, I can't portray them due to my nerves and lack of understanding of social cues.
Okay, so what you're seeing here is the first person choices you need to make to resolve the conflict here. So what we know about this character, what we know about their needs and how we can accommodate them in an interview situation. to make sure that interview goes as well as possible for Rosalina. And that's a very, very simple, short example of using a relatable character, introducing the conflict, this interview situation. Nobody likes to be interviewed, but this person has particular challenges they need to overcome. And then that creating a desire for resolution. And that in itself then gives you the actions and the training that you can then use to resolve the conflict, but also hit a learning outcome as well. And by having this kind of combination of first person perspective, you're making decisions and you're finding out about this person through this like sort of very personal narration. It's an example of how storytelling can create empathy and a greater understanding and bring you closer to the topic in order to take those actions to resolve this situation. So if you don't have the budget that Litmos has in terms of producing content, and a team of 17 instructional designers and digital designers working together to produce content like that, the same principles apply. So if you're a team of one, or you don't have a big budget to apply some of these storytelling techniques in quite so an evocative way, there's things you can still do. Certainly keeping your costs down through use of royalty-free resources like Unsplash for free stock images and freesound.org for sound effects are two places I'd recommend you go straight away. And the Creative Commons community shares so much good stuff on what we call a CC0 Creative Commons license that you can use freely without attribution or without having to pay a fee. You could use your own voice. Again, I've got many friends who are actual voiceover artists, but if you're on a budget and you can't afford a voiceover artist, then you could perhaps train your own voice. You could think about doing your own narration. You could even leverage some of the new AI tools, which are becoming very good at being able to deliver narration for short courses. I think about how that narration can be used in storytelling situations as well, not just to necessarily read what's on a screen, but perhaps take the form of a character in a story, in a course. You could also keep it simple. You could use text-based interactions in a kind of chat style environment, even in your team's, in your company's workspace, for instance. And that scales really well on mobile devices. You could create micro-learning experiences. I've seen and used lots of good examples of characters appearing in Teams chats, and that character conveying little nuggets of information, and you having to kind of put that information together as a learner. But essentially, it's a text-based interaction. Those of you who are a bit older and perhaps remember some of those early sort of choose your own adventure computer games that are completely text-based as well. You're going back towards something like that, but think about how you can frame that in a modern setting. And by doing that, you can get creative and craft narratives in kind of WhatsApp format, emails, and use the corporate workspace as well as your LMS to build, compelling learning stories. You'd be very surprised at what a lot of modern CSM systems can do in terms of how you can manage email campaigns and use those as part of learning as well. So there's lots of things you can do on a budget. And I encourage you, if you're a small e-learning department of one, to get very friendly with your graphic designer, if there's one in your company, your marketing department, because they'll have resources that they can help you out with. Anything you'd like to add to that, Shannon?
Yeah, I really like a lot of these suggestions, and I think, a lot of the people on this call are probably dealing with being a very small team. And I think that there's a lot of resources you can pull from within your organization too. When I was at a smaller company, I did a lot of voiceover. So I'm by no means a professional, but I have a lot of experience. So yeah, I think really leaning into the other resources in your team. And remember that using media can be used really sparingly and have a real impact. So, even just using images of characters to establish them, but then carry that throughout can be really impactful, even with the rest of the story being told by text. So, yeah, but I think it's a great way to get creative and remember that there's other people in your company, like you said, graphic designers or things like that, that may be able to help you. The other way that you can enhance your story is also to curate content. If we go to the next slide, we can talk about how there's times where it may make sense to bring in other resources into your story versus just relying on the storytelling alone. And so I think that there's often times where it makes sense to bring in articles or videos or create resources that can add to the story, particularly when your learners you want the learners to do something after. So this can be a great way to bring in a resource like the effective time management sheet that I've brought in, where you can present it as a resource within the story and then give it to your learner to utilize after. There may be times where you need a little bit more depth, and so you might provide articles on a certain topic that will allow your learner to dig in deeper into something that they're really interested in. Giving additional perspectives around things too, from when we're dealing with stories where it's oftentimes like a single perspective. And so adding additional resources that say, from a manager's perspective, or, even something that is like a professional article talking about a leader who's gone through change management or something like that, it can be really helpful. And then also like to give that reinforcement, a little short reminder after kind of like the cheat sheet, but something like that where you can ensure that that story continues to resonate is a great way, or is a great time to bring in additional resources that you don't want to distract from the story, but I think that there's a great way that you can add to a story by bringing in additional resources.
Yeah, the never-ending story. It doesn't end at the end of the course. Yeah, totally.
All right. So as we go into story inspiration, I have a question for everybody to share in the chat. What are some of the best examples of storytelling you have crafted or experienced? We've already established Lost is not one of them. Like in the chat, there was also a lot of other things. So, but Ted Lasso and Harry Potter we established were key examples of where they started with the end in mind.
I will give bonus points to anyone that mentions Breaking Bad because it's the greatest TV series, greatest story ever.
Yeah, I agree. Richard, I think you said that case studies are a great way to tell story. Absolutely. Like that's a good way to like dig into something and like you said, give other perspectives on a particular topic. So yeah, I really love that.
I see dead people. Actual events and outcomes, yeah. I mean, as long as you can anonymize them to the extent that you don't get into any legal trouble, using actual happenings, actual things that happened in a business as jumping off points for stories is really good way of doing it. Personal stories from the University of Life. Okay, yeah. So that kind of Vox Pop approach where you get individual contributors to talk about their own experiences can really bring that kind of Rashomon effect. Rashomon was a film in Japan in 1950 where the death of a samurai that occurs in a forest, but it's interpreted differently by every character who has kind of seen parts of the event. So getting lots of characters to reflect on an event is really interesting perspective.
Yeah, I really appreciate Katie's comment about using storytelling to tackle stigmas at work. And I think it's a great way. You talked about empathy as one of those 10 principles, and empathy is a great way to help people really understand the impact of something. So I really love that.
There's an interesting comment there about M. Night Shyamalan's films. You kind of go into them perhaps paying a bit more attention because you expect there to be a twist, which is an interesting space to work in. Christopher Nolan's films are very cerebral like that as well. You have to kind of pay attention, and sometimes I think the way you brand or position a story as you need to kind of sit up and pay attention can be an interesting space to work in. But in the kind of casual cut and thrust, you need to get this e-learning done by the end of the week. You'd have to kind of balance that kind of cerebralness, I think, with sort of practicality. Some interesting comments. That's a great comment. Drawing attention to certain events, being rewarded for noticing those details, like murder mysteries. Yeah, that's an interesting space to work in too. Giving some agency to the learner to choose their own adventure, to complete the story, to complete the puzzle. That's certainly something that I've seen done very well. Love Actually, all the plot lines come back together at the end. Yeah, Love Actually started with the end in mind. It was designed by instructional designers. I think Richard Curtis would write a very good course.
I like the STAR acronym. I hadn't heard that before. Situation, task, action, result. That's a good way to tackle a story as well.
Yeah, it is. Man in whole, context, challenge, activity, feedback. You can even go to the 17-stage Joseph Campbell model as well. They all encompass those kind of 4 steps. The Princess Bride.
Yeah, these are some great examples.
Yeah, really good, really good. So I've got a couple of examples here I'm going to share with you from the Litmos catalogue. The first is from a series of courses for accessibility for Ontarians with disabilities, and uses a kind of first-person perspective on what it's like to access services in a restaurant with different disabilities. And again, talking about empathy, use of perspective, and just making the point of how what you're talking about affects people in real life, but through storytelling. I think this is a really, really cool example if you'd like to play it.
It's a gorgeous day in Ontario. The sun is shining, birds are singing, and there's the smell of coffee in the air. You take a seat at the local cafe and look at the menu.
Can I take your order?
Were you able to access and understand the menu easily? Now imagine that this was your experience.
Can I take your order?
How did that feel? Did you struggle to read? For some people, they receive information like this.
Can I take your order?
And this?
Can I take your order?
And this?
Can I take your order?
Did the amount of text feel overwhelming? Did you miss the service queue? For many people in Ontario, this is a daily experience. They continually face barriers that prevent them from accessing the same goods, services, and facilities as those who do not have a disability.
So that's just a really sort of short example of how you can use perspective to provide instruction and really draw out what you're trying to put across in terms of change behaviours, new attitudes to a situation, and new skills and knowledge. The second example is from a course in our revenue enablement suite, and this is the culmination of several courses where you've been learning the ropes about sales, the sales technique and sales enablement. And we thought it'd be quite fun to cast this as being in a kind of team style environment. So if the video plays, it is quite small, so I'll talk you through it. So what's happening here is you're now placed as the kind of first person perspective in the place of a new employee at a fictional company, and you're interacting with all these other characters who are asking you questions, and they're putting you in situations, and you're having to kind of choose your own adventure through this. And it resembles the context you would see in a team style interaction to make it more realistic. And you interact with it in much the same way. So again, it's about that marriage of context and content. And through these decisions, you'll then receive a score, which you can see in the bottom corner, and the kind of sales leads going up by percentages, and navigate your way through this story. So this story changes in relation to your actions. So this branching scenario, this choose your own adventure approach, is a really powerful way of using storytelling to put yourself in the position of the man in the hole. You're in the hole and you need to dig your way out of it. And depending on how well you did that or not, you'll receive feedback at the end of the course, which kind of congratulates you or corrects you or puts you back on the path. We all used to do it, didn't we, with the choose your own adventure books? You know, you crossed the drawbridge and you've gone through and you've had your head cut off, or you've come across a dragon, or you've fallen down a pit, and then you go back to page 32 and kind of make the decisions again. So it's also about providing a safe space for you to fail, to kind of take chances, to integrate the knowledge of the course.
Not bad, but crucially, it could have been better. It's been a challenging period, and you helped the team make some improvements. It's essential to recognize why we must always maintain a customer-centric mindset throughout the entire sales process. Providing value by addressing needs and pain must underscore everything that we do. I suggest you take the time to reflect on what went well and where it went wrong, and then try going back through the sales cycle assessment and make some improvements. Good luck. Oh, and another thing. HR says there's an 8-week delay in all merchandise, so your welcome pack will no longer contain the Resolutions branded beach towel. So sorry.
And that was created by our team using our in-house tool called BlueJ, and is now available in our suite. So you can contact our sales team if you're interested in the revenue enablement suite of courses. But that's just another example of what we're talking about here, you know, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, using empathy and different perspectives to bring out the storytelling.
It's a gorgeous.
All right. And just a few examples from Go1. So Go1 is an aggregator. So we use a lot of different content providers. And I've got a couple of examples here. The first one is I Am Learning. I really enjoy I Am Learning in the way that they tell stories, and primarily because they use cartoons, or edutainment, as they like to call it, to tell their stories. And you know, GDPR, I don't know if anybody else has taken a GDPR course, but they are typically not super exciting. And the thing that I appreciate about I Am Learning is they use storytelling to get the point across. And because of the cartoons that they use, everybody can see themselves in those characters, and then they can understand the impact of what's happening. You can see the villain in the corner. And so I just think that I Am Learning has done a really great job. GDPR, I'm trying to remember what it stands for. Jonathan, you might.
General Data Protection Regulations, I believe.
Yes, it's a UK regulation though. And it's basically their privacy regulation. But it's just a good example of how you can make compliance training maybe a little more interesting. There was a comment above about how compliance training is about how to make sure that your employees don't ever get in the hole, which is totally true, but it's good to tell a story about how somebody maybe got in the hole because of a compliance violation, and then, you know, how that story resolved. And then the second example I brought in was from Sagos, who does amazing video content and is really great at the storytelling through videos, and then also using that first person interview style to really create empathy around a certain scenario, and particularly their management series is a great way, like a great series to talk about how, like, having managers really put themselves in these scenarios and be able to walk through what that might look like before they actually have to embrace the scenario on their own. So, all right. Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. We've got a few questions in the Q&A. There's also some in the chat that I wanted to call out before we dig into the Q&A ones. One of the questions was, how do we see AI fitting into storytelling process, and any tools to recommend? I'm curious, Jonathan, if there's any specific AI tools you've used.
I'm quite a fan of Claude AI. It's quite naturalistic in its responses, and for that reason I find it quite interesting to say, Claude, imagine you are a 28-year-old woman doing a job interview, and these are the factors that are making you nervous about a job interview. What might I do to accommodate you? A little bit like the example earlier. But you can use Claude to run scenarios, run personalities, and even answer questions in the style of a character, and help you build that character and help build a bit of a kind of character Bible. Particularly if you're referencing this character throughout a training course, it's quite good to kind of build up a kind of backstory that might never be presented on screen, but it's a good way of kind of getting into that, and just sense checking how that persona might react to different circumstances, and take you outside yourself a little bit, because as a white middle-aged man, my life experience is not the same as everybody else's, and just being able to cast yourself into a different mindset. Most of the generative AI tools will do that, but I find Claude to be really good at that.
there's a couple of suggestions in the chat. So Synthesia AI, and then also just using ChatGPT. I know I've used ChatGPT to write stories before, and it is a little scary, as Mario calls out. But yeah, I think that there's a lot coming in this space too. So I feel like there's some of these are a little bit limited, but I know that there's quite a few coming out, like you said, with voiceover, but then also creating motion graphics or like short videos. So it wouldn't be something that you would probably tell your whole story, though there are some for that as well. But ones that you could even create kind of a, like a sandwich kind of situation where you establish characters and then you give an ending to it. And so some of those video AI tools, I think, can be really valuable for that.
Definitely. And I think the future is in probably an element of sentiment analysis as well, which occurs live in your courses. We're not there yet, but we're going to move very quickly beyond multiple choice questions and have sort of free format answers that are analysed for their sentiments and whether you've kind of answered the question in your own words, and how that can link into kind of branching as well and having sort of intelligent and dynamic experiences that work around you. I think that's definitely the future that we're moving toward. But
Yeah.
you still need to direct that as a kind of director and still frame the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a question about what storytelling formats, text-based video, are best for inclusive and accessible storytelling experiences. Are there best practices for keeping things engaging but not excluding learners? I have some thoughts on this. I think that I do think that text-based can be a good option for inclusivity, because we know that representation is really important for inclusivity. And if you don't have the ability to create graphics and stuff like that, that can be harder to accomplish. I also think, like with I Am Learning, how they create characters that don't look human can also be a good way to create an inclusive story. But curious, Jonathan, what your experiences are with that?
Yeah, so ultimately, if you're looking to make something accessible from a screen reader point of view, there needs to be some text for it to work with. So that's where text-based interactions are good. But where it's a video where the message is contained in the video, in a visual, for instance, then you'd be looking at some sort of transcripting, some meta tagging, and some of the kind of fallbacks that would help somebody with a kind of a screen reader assistive device to really kind of interact with that. And just appreciating that people will interact with your content differently based on their own needs, and recognizing that and having fallbacks wherever possible. And ultimately, I think this is about, if somebody who is visually impaired, would they get the same information? If somebody was deaf, would they get the same information from it? Beyond the broader questions then about sort of cultural sensitivity, neurodiversity, it is a very, very big area. So I think knowing your audience to an extent is really, really key here, but really being mindful of web content accessibility guidelines in terms of how your content is scripted, sculpted and built, and almost looking to overshoot them, do better than the web content accessibility guidelines. But it's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing thing. It's something we always need to be working on all of the time, and just put ourselves in other people's shoes in terms of how they interact with our content.
All right, we have time for one more question. Any tips on how to streamline the creation of branching scenarios? I feel like this is.
I would recommend Twine. It's an online program you can use. I think you can download it as a native app as well, where you can literally put post-it notes on a board and build out your branching scenario and move things around very quickly. So Twine is very good for that. Perhaps start with pen and paper and post-it notes, move it into digital format in Twine, and just think about where things are going to go. Start with the end in mind and work backwards. And you can collaborate using Twine with other people as well to make sure that your story journey is achieving what it needs to achieve and hitting those milestones.
And really quick, the Ontario video showing the perspective of people, that's a Litmos course, correct?
It is. It's not released yet. It'll be released in September. That's September release, I believe. So it's out shortly. So it's hot off the press. So you've got a kind of a preview of that.
Great.
Well, beautiful. Yes, we have a ton of questions coming in because this was just such an engaging presentation that you give. And so all these questions will be sent to Litmos, everybody. So don't worry. You can also connect with Jonathan and Shannon on LinkedIn, chit chat with them all your good questions. But of course, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to leave with the audience today before we say our goodbyes?
Just
Yes, thank you for listening.
Jinx. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This was amazing. Thank you for the sneak peeks. And yes, everybody else, we do have one more session today. We will be taking about a 15-minute break. Up next, we have Sean Stowers joining us from WeLearning for their session, Creating Beautiful, Relevant, and Engaging Experience. So in just a moment, I will end this session. You can join our next session by returning to the event lobby and going to session tab. I hope you can stick around, and I hope to see you at the top of the hour. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.